The movie begins a few years in the past, and we see that the grandmother was having a chase through the air. She decides to improvise to escape the villains and jumps out of her vehicle without anyone noticing. She makes her way to the base of the mountain and defeats the guards with great ease. Her companion tells her that she must get there in time to stop the rocket and was being waited for the security guards. We start to see that she is fighting to defeat the villains and uses one of them to open the door, where we can see that she was being waited for the leader of the villains and ends up being beaten by one of his men. He puts her in a cage to prevent her from stopping them, and they start preparing to ignite their rocket. The doctor begins to say that he plans to use it to destroy the satellites and thus conquer the world with his communication system. But suddenly we see that she manages to escape and defeats the henchman by electrocuting him with the wires. She attacks the villain to stop his plans, and we see that by accident he had been trapped. Grandma uses the machine to turn off the device and manages to save the world from the villain's plans. We go to the present and see that Lincoln was telling the story for his friend to know. While at the main entrance, her grandparents had arrived and were excited because they were getting married. Grandma starts to say that she always wanted a family and that it was a long time ago when she was working as a spy. She tells Lincoln that she needed his help and that he is going to be the one in charge of protecting the rings. We start to see that they are getting ready to start the trip and that they were packing the most important things, while the neighbor was going to be in charge of making sure that the house was not robbed, and we see that Lisa shows him the most valuable of her inventions. We go to the plane, and the family was excited to have a vacation, where we can see that they didn't know how to behave in the right way and that they were bothering the other passengers. While Lincoln was excited about his grandmother's stories, and we see that it makes his grandfather sad, because in the past she was the best of spies and that her life instead was too boring. Lincoln begins to think that they are being overheard by the plane attendant and that they had been tricked into eating the microphones. They are on their way to continue their vacation and were excited about the location they chose. We go to the hotel, and Lincoln kept thinking there were mysterious people. The grandparents rent a boat to enjoy the vacation, and Lincoln went with them because he thought it was dangerous. He uses a camera to spy on people and ends up getting caught because of the lights. Lincoln tells his grandmother that they were being followed, and we see them get on the boat to hand over the camera. We start to see that they are fighting to try to stop them, and they manage to beat them pretty easily. So Lincoln is amazed at his grandmother's skills, and they get off the boat to return to their family. The grandmother uses her cell phone to call her partner and sends her the coordinates to send the agents, because it would be dangerous to involve her family, and she just wants to rest because she was retired. But suddenly we see that Lincoln doesn't listen to her and uses the cell phone to accept the mission. Then the woman they disturbed on the plane appears and says she found the camera they lost in the ocean. We return to the hotel, and Lincoln contacts his friend to ask for his help. Clyde is on his way back home and says he was ready to help him with the mission. Lincoln begins to tell him that they had been attacked because he took some photographs, and his friend sends the location of the possible perpetrators. We begin to see that he is getting ready to start the mission and that his grandmother realizes that Lincoln told lies. So she decides she has to stop him and disguises a person to be his replacement. Then she goes on her way to stop her grandson, and we see that the waiter was having trouble following through with the lie. Lincoln was infiltrating a shady restaurant and meets the woman he had met on the beach, while his family was celebrating with the person in disguise and failed to realize they were being duped. Lincoln was still investigating to look for the villains and says goodbye to the woman to go to the kitchen. He uses a device to listen in on the conversation and manages to realize that they were the villains of the story. We begin to see that he is infiltrating through the kitchen and that his grandmother stops him because he could be dangerous. Lincoln begins to tell her that the doctor was back and that he had cancelled the order to send other agents. But suddenly we see that they had been discovered and were being surrounded by the villain team. They start fighting to defeat the villains and manage to defeat them with their teamwork. Then they run to escape the restaurant and go at high speed on some kind of motorcycle. We start to see that they are being chased by the team of villains, and they leave the city to get away. But suddenly we see that they were being expected, and that the grandmother sacrifices herself to save her grandson. The family realizes that they were being tricked, and that their real grandmother was in trouble. The next morning, Lisa starts to show them that she made some preparations and that she made some inventions to help them with the mission. Then they go on their way to save their grandmother, and they manage to find the villain's base. But suddenly we see that they had been discovered because of a woman, and they steal the vehicle to avoid being caught. We begin to see them speed off to escape the villains, and they manage to infiltrate through a secret entrance. Lincoln tells his family that it could be dangerous and that they have to behave like real spies. The family goes on their way to investigate the facility and find a map with the location of their grandmother. But suddenly, we see that they set off one of the traps, and that ends up causing the family to be separated. They attack a guard to remove his clothes and disguise Mr. Lin so he won't be recognized. The guards realize that it was a disguised person, and we see that they are defeated by a pepper bottle. While the other team was on their way to look for their grandmother and disconnect the power to scare the villains. So they take the opportunity to continue advancing, and we see that they are discovered because they had a flashlight. We begin to see that they go at great speed to escape, and that they manage to save themselves thanks to Lisa's invention, while the grandmother was using the bathroom to open the door and begins to attack them to ask for their leader. We return to the family, and they meet again at the entrance to the prison. But when they arrive, they realize that their grandmother was not there because she went on her way to finish with the rocket, where we can see that she was being waited for one of the villains, and they begin to prepare to have a rematch. We start to see that he is attacking her with his hammer hand, and that he manages to defeat her very easily. But suddenly we see that he ends up being beaten, and that the grandmother stops because they caught her family. Then the woman who had been following them shows up and confesses that she was the doctor's wife. She starts to say that she doesn't want to conquer the world and is just out for revenge because she ruined his future. Because her husband was sent into space and she has waited years to complete her revenge. So she took advantage of the family vacation and that Lincoln had fallen into each of the traps. She ignites the rocket to send them into space and says that she was close to completing her revenge, while the grandmother manages to escape from the arms of the villain and ends up being hit by a kind of rock. The villain shows her that she had gotten the rings and that she wouldn't need them because she ran out of a husband. The grandmother runs off to try to get her to stop, and they start fighting to get the device. But suddenly we see that she was about to fall, and she decides to let go so she won't save her family. We start to see him speed off to get on the rocket, and he manages to make it in time to reunite with his family. Lincoln starts apologizing that it was all his fault, and that he ruined the vacation by being a selfish person. But suddenly we see that Grandma has an idea, and she wants to sacrifice herself so they escape through the bathroom. So Lincoln decides he can't allow it, and plans to sacrifice himself so they can forgive him. He uses the button to save his family, and we see that they were saddened by Lincoln's sacrifice. Lisa starts working because she thought of an idea, and uses her invention to make the rocket stop, with which she manages to make the rocket change direction and get it on its way back to Earth. Grandpa swims off to save his grandson and manages to get him back to the surface in time. Lincoln begins to be thankful that they saved him, and we see that they were happy that they were able to be together. Then they begin to prepare to start with the wedding, and Lincoln sold his watch to get some rings. As a last scene, the family was gathered to start with the celebration, and we see that the policeman had captured the villains. This is how the movie ends. Don't forget to subscribe, like, and comment on what more movies you would like to see on the channel.